Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Welcome. Today is October 7th, 2020 still. I don't know how it's still 2020, but it is. My name's Timothy Clancy. I'm your chief mulleteer with the InfoMullet. This is Bonky, the emotional support donkey. And I want to take a pause today before we get started. I was struggling with this episode because we have this new format with the InfoMullet where, the first episode of the month is going to focus on the presidential campaign and issues of domestic and international affairs and things that were weighty. And the second episode of the month was going to focus on COVID. And I really struggled last week, about this time last week, because there's a tension, right? COVID wave 2 is obviously coming. It's important. People are seeing it. And there's only so many episodes left before the election. So I'm balancing, how do I cover presidential issues of importance and COVID-19 when I've only got so many episodes left, and I'm not supposed to talk about COVID when I'm talking about the presidential campaign, and I'm not supposed to talk about the presidential campaign when I'm talking about COVID. Thankfully, Trump solved this for me last Thursday night by getting infected. So I want to just do a shout out to President Trump for simplifying this episode and allowing us to bring COVID and the presidential campaign as one topic to cover. As always with the InfoMullet, like, follow, and share. If you got anyone who wants to see this, please share the video as it goes live. We're going to go ahead and put this up on YouTube on Friday. The full episode, we'll cut out the bits at the morning, and then we'll put the segments up next week. A quick shout out to all our Mulleteer Patreon subscribers. If you haven't yet, check it out. It's www.patreon.com/infomullet. $5 a month to become a Mulleteer subscriber. It really helps out put all this together, and we appreciate all our Patreon supporters. And we're going to go ahead and get started with everything that's going on. So again, thank you to President Trump for getting infected. It really simplified the editorial decision. Today's episode is going to be a mix of, obviously, the White House outbreak of COVID-19. We're going to start off with that, but we'll move from that into the wave 2 COVID that's manifesting worldwide as well as in the United States. Then we're going to take a quick jaunt to some international affairs. We'll look at the Armenian and AZERBAIJAN war, skip over to the Irish Brexit negotiations that are happening, and then round up with some media literacy on how to spot a conspiracy video on YouTube without wasting 45 minutes of your life. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me say a few hellos to folks who have joined in. Jeremy, good to see you. Right, Valeria, good to see you. Trisha, thanks. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, top story. If you go to the InfoMullet, this is the article on there, Et2 COVID. The White House has gotten hit and hit pretty hard. And I wanted to, there's been a lot of coverage. This isn't like new, but what I try and do with the InfoMullet is provide a little more context to help people understand. And if we think about like last Friday and Saturday, there's all this, well, maybe it's fake, or maybe he's just trying to get out of the debate. And I'm like, I don't think so. Because I was looking at, I've done a lot of COVID coverage. And, these things, there's a timing factor. When there's potential super spreader events, you may have 1 or 2 positives early on, but that number is going to rapidly increase. And I said, look, on Friday, if this thing's going to be high by the weekend in positive cases and the types of people who are getting infected, I don't think this is a fake event at all. And it has since spread, and it continues to spread. And now what we're at is, well, I'll go ahead and I'll share this diagram because I want to kind of, hopefully this will help people with the context. So this chart is kind of like a placemat, right, to help understand what's going on, because there's a lot of implications. This COVID outbreak at the White House touches on a lot of things. At the top here, these are the 4 spreading events that have been identified. You have the September 26 Barrett nomination. This was they call it a Rose Garden ceremony, but we need to be very clear that there were activities and receptions before and after that were inside. So it wasn't that this was just an outside event. And as you've seen the pictures, I've got some of them up on the InfoMullet. Not a lot of face masks, not a lot of social distancing. This is believed to be the super spreader event. So they're kind of targeting. They don't know who brought it in. They haven't done the contact tracing to figure out. It could have been several people, but a super spreader event happens when you have someone who has a very high viral load intersects with an event that has the the circumstances of a lot of people, no social distancing and close proximity. And even though all the pictures are of the outside event, it's probably more likely that the spreading happened at the inside events, the receptions and things like that, where it was indoors. Obviously, following right on the heels of the Rose Garden ceremony to nominate Supreme Court nominee Barrett was the presidential debate in preparation. So people who were at the Rose Garden ceremony were also getting ready for the debate. Then we have a Gold Star family event, a reception. Gold Star family members, for those who don't know, are members who have lost loved ones in the services. And so this was a regular event that the White House does, sort of a reception for Gold Star families. But it happened right in this context when there's an active outbreak spread. And then we have the Minnesota fundraiser that was attended on September 30th. Even though Hope Hicks had, I think, already declared herself positive, and there was strong suspicion, or there's a question of who knew what when, but there's a real question of whether this fundraiser was a good idea to hold. So these are the spreading events. And as you go down, it filters through with the White House. And this is important to understand from the context, because once you have an outbreak at the White House is like, COVID loves the White House. It's cramped corridors, people working in tight locations, not a whole lot of safety protocols in place. And it spread from there very quickly in what I'm calling wave one of this event. So just in the first week, we're up to about 40 positives right now. There are 10 positives in the White House directly. This is the president, the first lady, the president's body man, Nick Luna, a valet, some of the staff, two residential staff. These 10 positives are in the White House residential staff and active staff as well. And from here, the White House is a nexus of intersection for a lot of things. And so these color codings at the bottom, I'm going to touch on them. It has national security implications, national government implications, presidential campaign implications, and U.S. Senate. So from the White House, and I'm not drawing lines because it's not clear. The White House has these positives, and then you have 3 White House military staff. This was the U.S. Coast Guard aide to the president, and the president's valet is a military personnel. They both got positive. And then there was a vice commandant of the Coast Guard, an Admiral Charles Ray. He was positive, but he attended this Gold Star family event. So it's not clear whether he got it from the Gold Star family reception or from some contact with the Coast Guard aide. The problem is he was the primary means of transferring it to the risk to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The vice commandant attended a meeting on Friday morning in the tank. That's that, you ever see it in movies, it's the closed room where everyone is making the decisions for the missions and all that. That's the tank. He was in that room with all the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, they have tested negative, but out of an abundance of caution, they have self-isolated. So the first thing that we got to talk about is in one blow, you've taken the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's not that they're online. I want to be careful here. Continuity of government, the DoD has built in a lot of redundancy. But you've certainly degraded the capability when you have to take these Joint Chiefs, and they're all working remotely. This is the Army Chief of Staff, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Commandant, even Space Force. Space Force got hit, right? We just stood up Space Force, and their first campaign ribbon is going to be a White House seal with a COVID symbol on it for this. They're all self-isolating except for the Marine Commandant, who's in his office doing push-ups to push this back. No positive tests yet in the Joint Chiefs, but the national security here is these Joint Chiefs of Staff, each into themselves, is like a little mini White House. These interact with lots of people all the time. So there's a risk of spread now at the Pentagon, but the good news is the DoD takes this very seriously. They have lots of protocols in place to ensure that if there is a COVID outbreak, it gets contained. They practice all the safe practices. You say they're self-isolating even though they're testing negatives. That was the problem, is with these super spreader events, they were just testing negative, but they weren't, a negative test alone isn't sufficient. So the DoD is doing the right thing by isolating the Joint Chiefs, but there's the national security implication. Now we move into continuity of government. And first of all, the president is still the president. He hasn't transferred power. There's been no invocation in the 25th. He got out of the hospital. I think he's still under effectively hospital observation in the White House. They've got a lot of capabilities there. They've got a lot of infrastructure. It's not impossible for him to be still receiving what would be the equivalent of a moderate treatment in the White House. And of course, he's active on Twitter. But 2 of the senior advisors to the president, Hope Hicks and Stephen Miller, have both tested positive, and now they're isolating. These senior advisors, they don't have statutory roles, but they are very key in forming government policy, directing actions and making sure that the president's directives are carried out. So this is a hit to national government. Again, continuity of government. I'm not saying the nuclear codes are in jeopardy or we don't have a functioning government, but it's certainly degraded because not only are they, these senior advisors, positive, but two other senior advisors whose names you might find familiar are negative but isolating. And that's Jared Kushner, who is in charge of the coronavirus response. He's isolating now, even though he's negative, he's in quarantine. And Ivanka Trump, who does something, I think. But she's isolating too. And because Trump relies on his family to fill these advisory roles, that's a hit to the national government. The president's ability to effectively manage the government has taken a big hit. But wait, there's more. The press office, the people we would be going to ask questions, like the press secretary, the principal assistant press secretary, and the assistant to the principal press secretary, all positive, all quarantine, goodbye. 3 media journalists, unfortunately, they were exposed too. So the entire apparatus, not, you can debate the validity and the utility of the press secretary office under any presidents. It's obviously there for the support of the president, but they're working remotely too. So the national government has taken a big hit. And then we switch over to the presidential campaign. This was my focus on Friday because in the presidential campaign, you have 10 positives now, starting with the campaign chairman himself. The head of the president's campaign is positive and isolating. Then you've got 9 or so people who were involved in debate preparation, the most senior of which is Chris Christie. Chris Christie is now hospitalized. He's under observation in a hospital. A lot of these folks were at the Barrett nomination. That's why they think this is a super spreader event. But a campaign office, you go up to Arlington, Virginia, where this office is, they're working elbow to elbow and just crammed in there. And they're not practicing the good measures because Trump himself isn't modeling it. So not surprising to see it spread. The presidential campaign was taken offline over the weekend as they had to clean the headquarters out. I mean, Pence is out there campaigning and stuff like that, but there's a hit here. The Republican National Committee, the chairwoman, Ronna McDonald, I think, also tested positive. She's self-isolating. So you've got a hit to the presidential campaign. And finally, last but definitely not least, the U.S. Senate. Because this is the Supreme Court Justice nomination event that was the super spreader event, most of the Republicans, I think 4 Republicans on the Judiciary Committee were at this event, and they got it. And so let's start with the Judiciary Committee. There are 2 positives on the Judiciary Committee, 2 Republican senators. They're now in quarantine. They're self-isolating. The committee hearings are scheduled for October 12th. That is feasibly, if they recover, that could continue to go forward. But here's where it gets interesting. Senate rules are that you can't vote by proxy just because. Like the House has put in place a lot of COVID rules for proxy voting. In the Senate, however, the current rule is you can only vote by proxy if it doesn't affect the outcome. So if it's a 60 to 40 vote and you want to throw in, your number 60, they'll let you vote by proxy. But if it would change the outcome, you don't get to do a proxy vote. And why that is a big debate, but those are the Senate rules. Well, the Judiciary Committee is normally a 12-10 split between Republicans and Democrats. Right now, with 2 senators quarantining and the proxy vote rules, it's a 10-10 split, which means if the vote came up today for Barrett's confirmation, they couldn't pass her out of the Judiciary Committee. They couldn't move her forward. Again, there's time for this to resolve itself as long as no more senators within the Judiciary Committee get positive and have to quarantine. Senator Graham's already said he's going to go ahead with the hearings. They can certainly start the hearings. They can hold it, but they're in a quandary when it comes to any procedural motions during the hearing. If they've only got a 10-10 split of effective votes on the floor and they can't bring in those proxy votes, they may want to wait, delaying it until they can bring these senators back in, healthy presumably, and get those votes. Those 2 plus 1 more on the Republican side in the Senate have tested positive, plus an additional senator who was exposed to these is testing negative, but self-isolating. So the Senate on the floor, the GOP has a 53-47 majority. They're now down to 49, something like that, 49-47 majority on the floor. So if a floor vote happened, remember those proxy rules, you can only vote if it wouldn't change the outcome. Now, that's still enough Republican majority, and there's not many people who are willing to vote against the Supreme Court, but you can see how narrow this margin is becoming. And I think McConnell noticed this or saw this coming down the pipe because he made a very unusual announcement on Monday, which is that he was going to yank the Senate into what's called pro forma sessions. So the Senate official business is closed. What they're doing is having pro forma session. It's a skeletal staff. Most of the Senate's out of the building. They just have someone go up and read a 30-second thing that makes them officially in session, so they're not in vacancy, because if the Senate's in vacancy, that has constitutional implications for appointments. But they're in pro forma. That's going to prevent votes happening that might go against the Republicans. Now, that's not going to keep the Judiciary Committee from holding its hearings. They can continue to hold their hearings even in pro forma sessions, but it shows to you the bind that this has caused to Senate. You've got the stimulus bill, whether it's going to be Trump wants it to go forward or not. Those negotiations still happening. You have the Supreme Court nomination. And the challenge for McConnell is if he loses one or two more senators, he doesn't have enough people to change the rules to make the proxy votes looser, as the Democrats were advising all along. So this is just a really big mess. And the final thing with the Senate is at least one of these senators, Tom Tillis, who is positive, is in a pretty tight race in North Carolina. He's 3 to 4 points behind. He needed this last month to catch up. Now he's sidelined off of the campaign and can't campaign. And you're talking a Senate race that is going to come down to the wire. If they lose Tom Tillis and they lose Susan Collins, and, you know, I think South Carolina's a bit out, you could see a flip of the Senate, and it could come down to senators who can't campaign because of this COVID outbreak. And this affects fundraising. You know, the president's not out there doing fundraising. The money's not coming in. They're already behind. This has a huge implication. And all of this is just wave one. These are all infections that probably came originally from any of these original events and just detected in this first week. Last week, before anyone quarantined or self-isolated, all of these people were moving around exposing other people, which means we're going to get a second wave of infections probably beginning this Friday through next week, which are the second round of people who are affected by these people. And if we've got 40 now, you could probably reasonably say somewhere between 100 to 150 all told when it's done. Now, that may be mainly staffers or things like that, but that shows the impact of this, and it just continues to expand. I've got this article I keep updating with the you know, with the latest thing, and it just keeps growing and growing. So these are the implications of this White House COVID outbreak. It's pretty major. Let me go back to some questions here. See what there's are. Okay. Yeah. Jerry Spalding's bringing up Rudy Giuliani wasn't looking good on the news the other night. He had a coughing fit. I'm trying to be careful of not getting ahead of the confirmations, and I'm staying focused on those. Like Rudy Giuliani obviously has an impact on the presidential campaign, but, you know, Kellyanne Conway got infected. She's an advisor to the president, but sort of informal. She's definitely a spokesperson, but her daughter got it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's going to be family implications to this and people getting it. But the real crux is, at the time they needed it most, the lackadaisical attitude of this White House has come back to sort of betray itself, which is why I titled this Et tu COVID, right? You know, they didn't take it seriously. They didn't put in place the protocols. And now they've had the feared outbreak event that is spreading, and we'll see where it goes. Krista's asking, how odds that they'll bring in a senator who's positive just to get the votes? That's a good question. I think they have timing. So the Senate is all about timing, right? There's a bazillion rules for delaying and taking longer and slowing things down in the Senate. I think someone like McConnell, a tactician like him, someone like Reid when he was in the Democrats' Senate Majority Leader, these are parliamentarians. I think as long as they have time, they're not going to push risking more, because let's face it, the senatorial demographic is old. You don't want to risk, if you're a senator, you're going to be looking at your fellow senators who are positive and being like, that could be me. And there's a high chance if you lose a senator to death, all of a sudden you don't have any vote. So I think they're going to use time and try and manage this in time. Right now they're playing space for time. They're basically saying, all right, the hearings start the 12th of October. We put the Senate in pro forma. Our planned vote is the 22nd, I think, or 29th is when McConnell plans to vote. That gives them a few weeks for people to go out, get through their illnesses, come back. But I think they're underplaying the round two that I'm talking about. We'll see how much of round two hits the Senate. My guess is there's staffers, there's chief of staffs, and probably at least a few more senators who are going to get caught in round 2. And if that's the case, that timetable may be off. And what they're trying to do is they're balancing this. There's the election day results. If there's an overwhelming win for Biden, the Senate's going to be in a real tough spot to pass Barrett under those conditions, because they know it's going to, especially if the Senate flips, they know it's just going to be undone. So I think they're going to try and do it before the November election, but after everyone gets back. So they have a little time to play with. But if round 2 happens and we see a few more senators get positive where their start date is this week coming up, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, Carrie is saying, don't believe in science, science don't care. As I said in the article, 2020 ain't here to play. So this dovetails actually into the broader question, which is what's going on with wave 2, right? By the way, tests in DC have spiked. There is a definite spike. This is a small town relative to other towns, and they're all interconnected. And there's been a sharp test and request of increase in tests. So I'm not saying DC is going to be hit by a major outbreak from this, but people are nervous. This is a very interconnected town, a very relationship-based town. But let's take a step back and look at the broader picture, which is COVID-19 wave 2 worldwide. So wave 2 is, we always suspected it was going to come in the fall, and we're seeing evidence of that now. And what this is the Vienna Institute Corona Traffic Light Tracker. The Vienna Institute is a complexity research science group in Vienna, Austria. They're very good. I like their tracker because it gives us a nice view and has a couple functions. The link to this is in the, so I put the world layer on, and to clear the, green is less than 1 positive test per 100,000 inhabitants within the last 14 days. So this is a positive infection rate. Yellow is less than 10 cases tested positive. Red is 10 and up. And the basic, when this was first released, the scientists were out there talking on the Santa Fe Complexity Institute, which is another group I work, deal with on the Facebook stuff. They were saying, if it's yellow, you don't want to travel there. If it's red, they're not going to let people leave. So that gives you a gauge. Green is where you want to be on this map. And you can see that this is now, a lot of red is coming on in Europe and things like that. And you can hover over these and see the number of positive cases per 100,000. So we can zoom in a little bit here, and we can see that the United Kingdom, 16 positive, France is up to 24 positive, Spain, 32 positive per 100,000, Denmark's getting, 11 positive. Some of the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries, my favorite audience in Sweden, play that Sabaton, they're at 6 positive cases per 100,000. That's higher than their Norway. They're probably double Norway, a little bit double Finland, about the same as Poland or Germany, double Germany actually. So, but the second wave that's hitting is hitting in these European countries that you see here in red. Doesn't mean it's not going to spread. In the US, to shift over, you can look at it by state, and it's really, I talked a couple weeks ago about the risk of the ping pong effect. And the ping pong effect is when you think about the United States is very large, it has multiple regional reservoirs, and it starts in the Northeast, and the South is unaffected. So the South gets lax, and it goes from the Northeast to the South. The South has its outbreak. Meanwhile, the Northeast gets calm. It gets lacked. It moves from the South into the North Central or the Mid Central, and then back to the Northeast. And you see here, KP was talking about Massachusetts. So you can see here, Massachusetts, that's Rhode Island, 10.7 positive cases. So just above the yellow to red split, but not looking good. But check out these northern states. Everyone's like, I'm in Montana or North Dakota. There's no one here. If I didn't see if Joe Hogan's on, these rural areas are like, well, we don't need to worry. We're by ourselves, no problems. Montana, 40 cases per 100,000 in the last 14 days. North Dakota, 73 positive cases per 100,000. That's an astonishing positive rate. 24, Wyoming's 28, South Dakota's 64. So you can see how it's ping-ponged up. It went from the South into the Mid-Central. It's now in the North Central, and my guess is it will spread out to the coast again. And we'll have this rapidly rotating ping pong effect as it bounces between these reservoirs and continues. Each area is like, hey, we're fine, relax. And then it picks up because we haven't dealt with this as a nation. We haven't had a national response, whether it's hammer and dance or panopticon, which I don't think we can do, but we haven't really done the steps necessary to deal with this. Our contact tracing is still not sufficient. Our testing isn't still sufficient. Everyone keeps hoping it's ending. Well, here we are now in October, and flu season's coming. Flu usually starts October, November, December, February, January, February, sometime in there it peaks. I'd say, I don't know at all when flu season is going to start this year, but we're in the risk area of getting a flu season on top of a coronavirus, and that's bad news. But another reason I like the coronavirus, this tracker, is it has a nice, easy, you can do a trend analysis. Click this button here. And what the trend does is it shows whether the trend is rising or falling. And you can see up here that a light green indicates a falling trend, and the light pink to purple, the darker the purple, the higher the trend. And what this is it's the angle of the slope. So if you think about remember when we looked at these rates of change, the angle of the slope, the higher that slope gets, the faster it's accelerating. So a rising trend with a higher slope means that you have an active outbreak and that exponential feedback effect is going on. Well, a lot of purple out here. And this is where, we look at the traffic light, we say, let's pick on our Baltic states, right? Oh, the Baltic states are all yellow. That's not as bad as red, right? Yellow better than red, not bad. But you look at the trend, and I'm sorry, I'm navigating around. Zoom is trying to put the bar, there we go. So you click on the trend, and you see that they are accelerating, right? The trend in the Baltic states is acceleration. So it's, even though it's yellow now, it may be worse later. And of course, the US is dark purple. Canada's accelerating. That's scary because Canada is struggling now with a new outbreak. This is what wave 2 looks like. It looks like accelerating trends hitting areas, and a lot of it's in the Northern Hemisphere. Brazil does not have, now we don't know what the reporting on Brazil has a declining. It went through its big spike and is still suffering, but it's a declining trend. That doesn't mean the problem the world's going to face is just like that ping pong effect I described for the US, where different regions act as reservoirs and then ping pong to other regions when they get lax. The world is now in a ping pong state. Certain countries have done well and continue to do well, but there's enough regional reservoirs that Brazil is going to have its wave 2. And it may be a couple months from now, but it's going to ping pong from some reservoir in the Northern Hemisphere back south. And so this is a real challenge of the wave 2. And all of this is happening right on top of on top of the flu season. So the good times of the summer, when we only had, COVID to worry about, is declining, because now we're into the flu season, and that's going to go on top. And you see this on the death rate, which, let me bring that up real quick. The US death rate has still, so this is the US death chart, and just to clear the charts, the daily deaths per, right here in the absolute number, and the little blue lines is every day's daily death. The red line is a 7-day moving average. I've got 2 outlier events marked here where a state dumped a bunch of reported deaths all at once without really allocating them to days. It was sort of a backlog, which kind of creates some outlier effects. But you can see really clearly now, here's wave 1. It goes down. It never really ends. Wave 1.5 comes up, and it's been tapering off. But remember, we're in those rising rates now. So we're going to get hit by wave 1.5 will probably just smooth into wave 2 right as the flu season hits. And we're already at 210,000 deaths. So this is surpassed. Flu is normally 18,000. I think the worst was 60,000 in 2018. We passed the Vietnam War. We passed World War I. We're heading toward the Civil War for casualties. I think that's 400,000. World War II might be a couple. I mean, we're hitting those numbers, and this is just in the first year without a flu season yet. That's why I stay concerned about this. And although I'm, you kind of make light of the White House outbreak because it's kind of self-inflicted, these are really serious things that people continue not to take this seriously, and we're continuing to suffer because of it. So let me check to see if there are, let's see here, some questions. By red, do you mean orange? This is Ryan's question. Yeah, if it's reddish orange, it may not come through well. Basically, and the links are on there. If you want to go play around with the site, the link to the Vienna Institute's on the links there. Joe's confirming that rural North Missouri is still in full denial. Elizabeth, Montana has counties going completely against any preventive measures. Well, And that's the thing is if it's not in your area, this is what happened in the White House, right? They're thinking, well, we've had a few people get sick, but no major problems. Even with 10 million people have been infected in the US, that's probably 3% of the population. So with everything that's gone on, only 3% of the population, if you aren't in that area, you're in denial potentially. This isn't real, they're exaggerating it. But once it hits you, it's too late. If you aren't doing the preventative measures you need to do a week prior to that super spreader event, you're gone in the water, because you're going to find out a week or two after the super spreader event. And by that point, the people who got infected at the super spreader event have already infected the second round of people who themselves are spreading out. And this is the challenge of COVID. You've got to have, the White House effectively shut down on Friday. From what I'm reading and hearing, the halls are empty. Most staffers are working remotely. Everything's being cleaned. But that was done last Friday. It's too late. There's already been a second round of infections, and who those people may have exposed coming out of this. Now, maybe it gets contained after that because, they're going to take it seriously. Who knows? Trisha saying, get your flu shot. Absolutely true. Trisha, will falling temperatures make the second wave even more intense by keeping people indoors? Couple things. The COVID, generally coronaviruses like cooler temperatures, so that's going to favor them. Obviously, hot temperatures didn't keep it from expanding. That was a big myth. Obviously, as people come indoors, it's better to be outdoors than indoors. Recirculated air is very bad. So, and just in fall, people tend to be sicker. Their immune systems are less robust. There's other things going on. They got flus and all these bugs. Generally, fall and winter is a bad time for illnesses. It's just the way it is. And certainly, I don't think that's going to be any different from COVID. We haven't seen any indication that it will get lighter. So I'm unfortunately calling it's going to be much worse, which means we may have, a 300,000 death tally by the end of the year. And we may continue right into January, February at those numbers. So this is going to be something, the presidential campaign is going to end one way or another here coming up, but the COVID pandemic is not going to end for a long time. It's make peace with the new normal, unfortunately. So let's take a pause here. If you haven't yet, like, follow, or share the Info Mullet, share this video out, like the page. Visit us on YouTube and the blog. We've got this article on the White House is on the blog. If you haven't yet become a Patreon supporter, it's only $5 a month. We appreciate, we have our muleteers, senior muleteers, and Medici muleteers. We appreciate all of them. Really a great crew of people, very passionate about understanding the context. So check it out, www.patreon.com/infomullet. And I don't see any more questions on COVID, so the timing's right. I'm going to switch over to national affairs, check my notes here. All right. Have you got your Sabaton started? If not, crank it up, put the dial to 11, and get that Sabaton music going, because we're going to Eastern Europe. So, and that was a dramatic lead-in when I didn't have the page ready. So give me a second. Okay, here we go. Share screen. All right, so here's Eastern Europe, Middle East. This is, for those who don't know, Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? I've got them centered here in the map, right? Let's give myself some annotation, right? So we've got Armenia, we have Azerbaijan, right? These two countries went to war a week ago. And everyone's like, okay, so what? You either know about it or you don't. And what I want to do is give some context here. So first of all, these two countries, Armenia, they have different ethnographic populations and sort of split, but let's go through them. Armenia is ethnically Armenian, and Armenian Christianity has an extremely long pedigree going back almost to the beginning. In fact, if you go to Jerusalem, there's a quarter in Jerusalem, 1,000 Armenians live there because they have one of the oldest continuously inhabited churches of Christianity. They're right alongside the synagogues and the Church of the Nativity and all this other stuff. So Armenia has been a ethnic group for an incredibly long time, predominantly Christian. Azerbaijan is predominantly, they follow the Shia religion, a Muslim. However, they're much more secular, so when I say Shia, people see Iran, they think, oh, it's a secular theocracy. Not really. Both of these countries economically rely on natural resources. There's a ton of oil in this region. Baku here on the Caspian Sea is a concentration point for a lot of oil wells and oil shipping. And from a history standpoint, both of these existed as part of the Russian Empire. So these were elements of the Russian Empire. And in, let's see, so in 1917, the Russian Empire basically collapses under World War I. And three states, which are Georgia, here I'll put a, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan in 1917 form what's called the Trans-Caucasian Federation. This is an independent republic formed from these three groups. There was a lot of ethnic mixing, and they all said, we're going to throw in together and join each other. Remember, at the time, the Ottoman Empire has done a big push into this area, military offensive, to seize the oil wells as part of the war, World War I. They tried to push all the way out to Baku, and the World War I, week by week, has some great episodes on there. They got pushed back, but in 1970, the Russian Empire collapses. These three form what's called the Trans-Caucasian Republic. Shortly thereafter, 1918, the Ottoman Empire loses the war, along with Austria-Hungary and Germany. They're defeated. So what quickly happens, though, is these three states begin infighting over the distribution of who gets what natural resources and where do all these people live? Because World War I, if anything, was an ethnic war. Ethnicity was very important. A lot of people were trying to determine borders around ethnic groups, so there was a lot of conflict. The British came in and tried to help settle things and negotiate, and they were becoming autonomous republics when 1920, the Soviet Union decided to simplify it. The Red Army invades, and all of these now become, all of these now become republics of the Soviet Union. So in 1920, these three are now republics of the Soviet Union. And looking in, as we zoom in closer here, okay, let's see, there we go. So in 1920, all of these are republics of the Soviet Union: Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Joseph Stalin, who is from Georgia, pulls a move in 1921, which is very important for today. What he does is, there's two regions. There's the Nagorno-Karabakh region. I'm probably slaughtering that name. That is going to be, here we go. Probably in this region here, this mountain, Nagorno-Karabakh, and then down here, Nakhchivan. These two, Stalin declares as autonomous oblasts. And an oblast is kind of a designation in the Soviet Union that says you're part of a Soviet republic, but you're independent within that Soviet republic. And not unsurprisingly, the people in this region, I may not do, these drawings aren't working as expected. So in the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast, those are majority Armenian ethnic people inside the Azerbaijan Republic. In the Nakhchivan one in the southwest here, those are ethnic Azerbaijans in Armenia. And what Stalin is doing is this divide and conquer strategy, where he recognizes ethnic majority groups within small enclaves within a larger group, and he lets them become independent because it destabilizes the republic. It prevents the republic from becoming solidified around any one ethnicity, because at the time, Armenians and Azerbaijans began emigrating back and forth, so that you would see this sort of, it wasn't ethnic cleansing necessarily, although there were certainly, you know, harassment campaigns. It was just people moving. And so you begin seeing ethnic Armenians move out of the Azerbaijan enclave and ethnic Azerbaijans move out of the Armenian enclave. And these two stay as disputed areas where people are like, hey, that's our territory, but you allowed this other ethnic group to stay there throughout the Soviet Union. And what happens there is, fast forward to 1988, the Soviet Union is on the ropes. It's losing in Afghanistan, and it hasn't dissolved yet, but a conflict breaks out here in this area, this region that I call the Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's a war. Two Soviet republics go to war with each other. So they're going to war with each other now over this disputed province that's in the middle of Azerbaijan, this Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's, the Soviet Union doesn't have the power to stop them. It's a mountainous area. The Armenian Soviet Republic begins fighting with the Azerbaijan Soviet Republic. And out of it, this, one of the settlements, this continues after the Soviet Union collapses. This goes on till probably 1993, 95, I think. And what comes out of it is a independent republic of this autonomous area. It's called the Artashk Republic. Again, I'm probably butchering these names. It's a Republic of Artashk formed in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which maps that designation that Stalin gave it, and it includes the ethnic Armenians inside Azerbaijan. Now, the key thing here is that state is not recognized by anyone. It's not recognized by the UN. It's certainly not recognized by Azerbaijan. It's not even recognized by Armenia. But it gets support from Armenia, military support, and this has been the point of dispute ever since, is this ethnic Armenian enclave in the mountainous regions of Azerbaijan is getting military support. They're acting as an independent republic. They're not taking, it's kind of like, a separated area. And there's been conflicts in here. There's one in 2016. And this has been the basis. So this is the reason I'm going into this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, is that these are not isolated events. I'm going to try and draw here without, hopefully this will do. So you think about the surrounding regional players. Let's orient yourself. You have Turkey here, you have the Middle East, the players Syria, Israel, down here Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia's up here to the north. All of these players have a stake in this conflict. And what happened over the summer was that there began joint military exercises began being conducted around this disputed area by both sides, and they began getting statements of support. Russia made a statement of support to Armenia that it would back its territorial integrity. President Erdogan gave a statement of support to Azerbaijan that it would back its territorial integrity. So right now, when you've got two regional actors with a history of fighting and two major regional hegemon state powers backing them, that's a good recipe for regional conflict. And that's exactly what happened with, it broke out probably a week and a half ago. But those aren't the only people with interests in there. Since the fighting began, there's been a rumor that Turkey has sent actually Syrian rebel fighters from northwest Syria into Azerbaijan to fight against the Armenians. There's been rumors of a Russian mercenary groups going into Armenian to fight the Azerbaijans. You have PKK, YPJ Kurdish fighters from northeastern Syria and southern Turkey going into Armenia to fight the Azerbaijans. There's rumor of Iran sending weapons to Azerbaijan. There's video of military trucks. There's some dispute about that. Iran here, it's important to understand, Iran has ethnic populations of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it's trying to take a peacemaker approach and say, look, we got to calm this down. But on the one hand, they're saying that. On the other hand, they get sending. And unless you were thinking Israel was being left out, Israel is actually backing Azerbaijan with lethal weapon support. Military drones, things like that are being sent from Israel to Azerbaijan, which are now being used to fight the Armenians. The Armenians in Israel are like, what's going on? We've been here for 2,000 years. How could you do this to us? I mean, this whole thing is drawing in a lot of powers that are conflicting with one another. And oh yeah, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates also support Azerbaijan, but pissed off Turkey because they broadcast a announcement from the president of Armenia that was derogatory to Erdogan. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia are at odds. All of this is a recipe for a broader regional war. We just had one in Syria that drew in everyone around us. And, for those who have been watching, this isn't the only conflict that is going on in this area between some of these things. People who have been watching know that we've got, here we go. You've got Russia and Turkey have fought already once in Syria. Turkey and Russia are currently fighting in Libya, which is over here to the west. Turkey, EU, Greece, and some of NATO are having not fights, but disagreements in the Mediterranean. I've gone over this in the past. So what you're beginning to see is these regional conflicts surrounding Turkey. And this is probably, I'm not going to say that the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict is caused by Turkey. That's not at all the case. There's a solid history of them disliking each other, fighting over this disputed province. There's a definite reason why this conflict exists. But you're seeing these conflicts beginning to define the edges of Turkish hegemony. And you can see Turk deciding to be very interventionist in these. That's not exactly out of character. Let's be clear. The U.S. is involved in this as well. There's something called the Minsk Group, which is France, U.S., and Russia. that is being involved in this. So it's not like Turkey's acting out of line for anyone else, but you can really begin to see here that these conflicts on the border of Turkey are kind of fault lines that are exposing where Turkey is going to decide, I'm going to play in this area and I'm going to have a forceful voice. Now, as of last time I checked, you know, the casualties here, the upper end estimates, which I'm going to caveat, there's 10,000 soldiers have been killed so far in 2 weeks of fighting. I want to put an asterisk next to that. That's the propaganda sources for Armenia and Azerbaijan describing how many thousands of someone else's side they've killed. So I'd take those numbers in a grain of salt. If you look at the independent sources, they're saying a few hundred soldiers have died or been wounded. Claims of about 100 Syrian fighters, those ones who came up from Syria fighters, have been killed or wounded. Probably 200 to 300 civilians have been killed. This artillery is happening in towns. These are, I mean, it's a mountainous area, but it's inhabited population. And there's been a huge displacement of Armenian people in this Nagorno-Karabakh region. And it's, you know, it seems to me, I'm not going to predict how this is going to end up. You know, who knows how this is going to end up. But it seems to me that the big dispute is on this ethnic enclave that was carved out by Stalin. And, you know, I don't know if at the end of the day it's sustainable to have that enclave inside Azerbaijan. Both of these countries, you know, we tend to think mistakenly of some of these countries as like, oh, Eastern Europe over there, you know, they're probably not doing well. Azerbaijan has modernized incredibly. Armenia is trying to do the same. They have strong economies. They do tourism, lots of national resources. Obviously, the tourism's off with the fighting, but these are not countries incapable of exerting military pressure on one another. And what's going to be interesting is I think it comes down to who's supported by which side to the greater extent and their willingness to sustain. I'm seeing signals already that Armenia may be willing to say, look, there's only so much we're willing to do for this enclave that's outside our borders. We have an ethnic relationship with them. Obviously, we want to support them, but I'm seeing leading signs that they're going to probably look for a negotiated settlement, which is probably going to have, you know, maybe it'll be resettlement, maybe it'll be some sort of new fancy peace deal where there's a brokered peace thing. But, you know, these enclaves inside other countries are just sources of ongoing instability. And let's see here, questions. Sabaton has showed up in the feed. Those aren't questions. Those are statements of traitorous intent. Baku, yes. I guess Baku is the name of the Star Wars planet. I never thought of that. I think of Baku in the Caspian Sea, but I guess there is a Star Wars reference. Anya is asking, on top of the neighboring maritime dispute going on in the Mediterranean. Yeah, Anya, as I said, there's a Mediterranean dispute, there's a Libyan dispute, there's a Syrian dispute, and there is a northern Iraqi dispute with the Kurds, and there is now the Armenia-Azerbaijan. All of these are disputes that Turkey's involved in, but I want to be clear here that Turkey's not the only player in town. As I pointed out on the map, there's a lot of intermixing, but President Erdogan has been very assertive in his foreign policy, and I think that's the new thing that is people are having to calculate. You know, Putin, okay, we got it. He's going to invade Crimea. He's going to go into Syria. He's going to play around in his backyard. But now Erdogan's kind of establishing, and what we're seeing is on the lines here, the regional hegemony of Russia, its sphere of influence, we're finding where the borders of that is. It's not in Libya. They got their butt kicked there. It's not in Syria. Turkey smacked them around there. We'll see if it's in Armenia or Azerbaijan. If Russia can't project, you know, these are countries that are bordering Russia. If Russia can't project and not necessarily dictate terms, but influence outcomes on its borders, that really shows a decline in Russia's projected strength and a rise opportunity for Iran and Turkey, which are the two regional power bases in the area. So yeah, a lot of regional instability going on in that neck of the woods. I'll see here if there's any questions. John Custis is asking, COVID, will it rise enough to prompt lockdowns? And if so, where and when will violence, militia, QAnon, pre-election, Antifa, etc. kick off? I don't think there will be much. So I'm not one of the ones who forecasts a lot of mass instability and violence. And I know everyone's like, well, where have you been all summer? You know, overall speaking, there's been an uptick in violence, but it tends to be one or two deaths here or there. It tends to be a lot of scuffling and things like that. There's definitely some arsons and burnings, but it's not like a mass wave of violence. I mean, I'm going to point out, I hate to say this because I don't want to jinx this. No one's noticed that we haven't had a major mass shooting, active shooting event, 5 or more casualties in almost a year and a half now. And it's kind of like we're not in record territory, but we're getting close to it. And it's interesting because we are focused on these micro issues, the Kenosha, Wisconsin shooting at the protest, the Antifa fights in Portland. These are micro issues when it comes to mass instability that I kind of look at. It doesn't mean there's not going to be protests and riots and things like that, but most of the protests and riots that have happened have been an outgrowth of police action or related to police action. We've seen some militia type activities when it comes to a lockdown. They'll go into the state house and they'll make a show of force, but we haven't seen a lot of violence associated with lockdowns. And one of the things that COVID does is it's an equal opportunity killer. Well, that's not really true. There's some groups that are more vulnerable than others. But what I'm saying is that unlike an ideological dispute, like police disparity, who's right, who's wrong, we'll get in a big argument. I have my opinions. Certainly I've said that before. But COVID-19, as soon as that hits your family and you see your grandparent or your parent or your loved one or something like that taken out by it, I think it begins to change your perspective. The reality is it just hasn't hit all the areas of the country. And as it hits more of these areas of the country and people get to see more, the president is still portraying this, I'm not affected, I'm not impacted, but I think his only really core base is believing him at all anymore on any of that. Jennifer's asking, is that mainly because people haven't been in school, workplaces? Definitely, Jennifer. That was one of the things I predicted early in the forecast, is that it was not going to, we would have less mass violence simply because people weren't in the workplaces and school. So the independent active shooting event that's at a random location. But think about all the scuffles and the riots and the protests we've had where armed people are on both sides. If someone wanted to do a mass shooting at a protest, that would be the avenue you would replace because you can't go to the school or the workplace. That there hasn't been those events. We haven't seen someone shoot 10, 15 people at one of these events. I hope to God it doesn't happen, but that's a sign that we're not seeing that level yet. And it goes to this theory that clandestine terrorism, the radicalization that goes behind it, takes time. It takes 6 to 18 months to go through this runway where your predatory mass violence, as opposed to your effective, get up to speed. And so if I were, for me, what's surprising to me so far over the summer is with all these riots and mass crowded events, there haven't been, as far as we know, other than the Boogaloo Boys Air Force sergeant in California, and he did a targeted killing. There haven't been mass shooting events at these. There's certainly been a lot of car rammings and other things. I'm not saying it's safe by any measure of the stretch of the imagination. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll see if it changes. But again, there was even a stretch, I think the last ones were in the summer when we had that spate of Walmart in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. That was summer of 2019, I think. Yeah, so even before the pandemic, we had a stretch. I'm not saying it's definitive, but it's just interesting to me with all the tension and concern people have, there haven't been incidents of mass violence. Speaking of which, let's go to where there's a concern of mass instability and violence, which is in Ireland. So moving over to Ireland, one of the questions Greg Keir asked this on what's happening with Brexit and Ireland. And for those who don't know, let's take a step back. So everyone's heard of the troubles in Ireland and the conflict in Ireland. There's a different map here we can go to, just if for some reason someone doesn't know the area we're talking about. Here we go. This is Ireland. There you go. Map of Ireland. Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom. Rest of the United Kingdom, Scotland and England are over here. Ireland itself. The Troubles were an intense period of conflict, 1960s, really in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, conflicting around this border here and in Northern Ireland itself, split largely between nationalists who wanted to reunite Northern Ireland with Ireland and what are called unionists or loyalists who want to keep Northern Ireland part of the United Kingdom. What happens in 1988 is there is what's called the Good Friday Accord, which is technically between political parties so it involves state actors like the United Kingdom and Ireland, but it also involved 8 political parties in Northern Ireland. And these political parties are often proxies for their violent wings. So, and I'm not going to go through all the name of the political parties, but I'm more familiar with the violent wings. These political parties would sign this accord. And so you have the Ulster Volunteer Force, the Ulster Defence Association. These groups are sided with Unionists or Loyalists. You have the Provisional Irish Republican Army. They are sided with the Nationalists. These non-state actor violent groups, through their political proxies, like Sinn Féin is the proxy of the Provisional IRA, they sign up to this Good Friday Accord. And I've done work on this. I can actually share this. So I've done, for my research, we actually looked at 4,500 incidents of terror in the last 23 years. And it captures these dynamics in here. So I want to show, here we go. So this is actually the database I use for my research, and I hope this is showing up and it's readable. And this is pulling the summary. So we looked at 4,500 incidents split between Western Europe, the United States. We typed them by violent ideology. We looked at whether they were done by non-state actors or individuals or uncertain. And we have this data. So this is the interface I use when I'm creating the papers and stuff. And to explain this chart, I'll be using some of these. This shows, this is looking just at Western Europe. And this is showing an incident rate per 1 million people of terrorist events in Western Europe over the last 23 years. So it goes 1995 through 2018. And I'm bringing this up because it captures these dynamics we're talking about. Now, we use incidents per 1 million. So it's got some odd numbers here, like 0.4 per 1 million. But that lets us normalize the population over 23 years. And right now, I'm looking at all of Western Europe across all violent ideologies. And this title up here just means we've excluded 9/11 and 2017, the loss, because of reasons. Read the paper. But what I can do with this is I can down select to only look at separatist violence. So when I click on separatist violence, you can see the change here. And the separatist violence shows what happens here. You have, these are incidents. And you can, first of all, if I select all, we're right now here at 0.36 going up to 0.5. And then it drops. So Western Europe as a whole has this rise and drop. Most of that is driven by separatism. People tend to overlook separatism as a continual, I call it the grindstone of Europe, right? There's a couple regional conflicts, Ireland being one, Corsica being another, Basque region in Spain. They're very localized, but in those localized areas, there's tons of terrorist activity. And so you see this increase spiking, and then the Good Friday Accord signed 1998, and you have this huge drop off because those military groups have signed on to the peace accord. Good Friday had a tremendous effect at reducing not just separatist violence, but violence across, excuse me, not just the people in Northern Ireland, but because that led a lot of the violence, you see it across Europe. Ireland was a big contributor of violence across Europe from an incident rate, and it drops. But what happens is not everyone's happy with this. So in 1997, a group called the Real IRA, and I apologize in advance for those who are not familiar with the naming conventions of the IRA. Everyone who's a nationalist in Ireland wants to be associated with the IRA. It's like the World of Darkness or the original White Wolf, and everyone's doing spin-off names from that or something like that. The new World of Darkness, the old World of Darkness. So we've got the Real IRA splits off from the Provisional IRA in 1997 and says, hey, we're not going to sign a peace. We're going to stick to our guns, literally, and keep fighting. And you see that there's continuing violence here at a much lower rate. This is the Real IRA. But then in 2012, a new non-state actor called the New IRA combines the Real IRA with a couple other splinter groups that are committed to violence, and their goal is to undo the Good Friday Peace Accords. And you can see here in 2012 that violence spikes up. Now, I can look at a couple things in different ways. This is just the incident rate. If we look at the casualty rate, these are casualties per 1 million. We can see the casualty rate drop off, and again, you see the small spike. These are overall casualties, so casualties are getting less over time. That's good news, but we can also look at the rate of incidents with casualties. This looks at, for all the incidents that happen, how many were people actually hurt at? And here you see a very big spike of that actually, even though and this is the impact of the Real IRA, even though or the New IRA, got to get those right, even though the frequency of violence declined, Once the new IRA gets in, it spikes the incidences that cause harm to people back up. And this is one of the challenges that the concern is that there's, and I want to be clear here, this violence, this only goes through 2018. Our data stops in 2018 because there's a lag to get it. So this is not like last week or last year or last 2 years. This is through 20, but there's already been an uptick in violence for the last 6 years in Northern Ireland, concentrating on this. And we can look at, if I look at a different one here and pull up ideology by region and template, this is going to divide it into non-state actors, lone wolves, and people we don't know. So here's the incident rate. So now I'm looking at Western Europe, Separatist, and you can see these three fishermen, those are non-state actors. So these are incidents by the real IRA, the new IRA, groups that are organized. Swarm is this gray at the bottom. Those are lone wolves where there's no evidence they're connected, and NA is we don't know. We suspect the NA in Ireland are kind of like wannabe copycats, but we're not entirely sure. And you can see here that as the non-state actor declines from 1998, it climbs back up with that announcement of the new IRA, and so do the wannabes. There's this matching pattern here. So maybe the NAs are ones that we, it was non-state actors we couldn't identify. They're being secretive about it. That's possible. But you see this uptick here that goes on, and this is why people are nervous. And you can definitely see it when it comes to the casualty rate and the incidents with casualty. It's a little choppy here because you don't always have data for each year, but you can begin to see why people are concerned in general that Ireland is not exactly stable or peaceful, even though it's had this long run. And what's coming on top of that is this problem of the Brexit. So Brexit is signed a couple years ago. And what Brexit does is part of Brexit is removing the United Kingdom from the European Union. And going back to our map, where that really makes a difference is, here we go. When you pull the United Kingdom out of the European Union, this border becomes the only land border between the United Kingdom and the European Union. In theory, this should be a customs border, like you're going into any place, controlled access points, import customs regulations, visa controls, passport controls, checking the produce and all the goods that you're carrying and declaring whether you brought any fruit across the border. All of that goes into place. And what's happened over time is this has been a major concern of Brexit from the very beginning. Initially, the fear is this would be what would be called a hard border. And a hard border is really what I just described. Right now it's open travel between them because within the EU there's open borders, so there's been open things. A hard border would put in place, they would reduce the number of crossings, so they'd have to create choke points to manage the flow of people. It would institute provisional checks, might require passport checks. It would separate these areas that have been trying to work together. And the fear is that on a tactical level, when you create choke points, you create attack points that the terrorists might, on either side, might decide to attack those. There was a lot of concern within the Unionists and the Nationalists that are within still part of the Good Friday Accord that this was some move to gain power by one side or the other. So pretty much everyone rejected a hard border. Then there was something called the backstop. And the backstop was a plan that said, well, okay, we'll just let Northern Ireland, even though it's part of the UK, we're going to treat it like it's in the EU, and we're just not going to have a border, and we'll all pretend that nothing exists. And that didn't really fly. That's not really legal under either EU treaty. There was a lot of pushback in the UK, so that got scrapped. Last summer, kind of a smart idea came out that I'm kind of in favor of, called the New Protocol. And the New Protocol is kind of like, it's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It says, so the border between the United Kingdom and Ireland exists somewhere in this water. And what that means is that it's basically de jure or de facto. De jure means by law, de facto means the actual. By law, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and has to have a hard border. By practice, that hard border would be put somewhere in the water, so it only affects people coming from the, England, Scotland area of the United Kingdom into Northern Ireland goods, and that relieves that pressure of having to create border controls along this entire border. And everyone's pretty much in agreement that that's a good idea. But like most things in Brexit, No implementation, no details, no planning, nothing's in effect. The timeline, this is supposed to go in place January 1st, and there's been zero effort to develop this, put it in place, clarify what's going on. There's a lot of rules in there that allow sort of unitary or unilateral changes by the prime minister or his party. And there's a lot of concern that we don't know what's going to happen come January 1st. I mean, it's like anything else with Brexit. It's high on rhetoric, low on practical implementation details. And the concern that people have is that if you put in any sort of hard, divisive shock to the system, you have to put in a hard border, or the new protocol has unexpected effects because it wasn't planned out well, you're feeding more. First of all, you're giving symbolic power to groups that want to undo the Good Friday Accord. They can say, look, the Good Friday Accord's not working, we're separated again. You give practical targets for them to attack into, to target security areas, and you give recruiting functions for these military groups, these splinter groups, the new IRA, to start recruiting again and pull back in support. And let's see here, questions right now. Rage across, so yeah, rage across Brexit, IRA classic, old school people are commenting. Let's see. UK has announced today that they will walk away from oh, good. So Laura's updated. UK has announced today they will walk away from Brexit talks next week if no deal. So this is new information. I obviously didn't see this when I was just yammering about what I'd researched this morning. And it's 2020, so why did I think that what I researched this morning would still be attacked? So what Laura is saying here is that the UK's announced they're going to walk away from the Brexit talks if no deal. And the question is, what does this mean? Well, first of all, this has been threatened many times, and I think it's partly a negotiating posture, but we are running out of time, so we're playing brinksmanship again, which is never fun. And what does it mean? It means if they walk away from the Brexit talks, then there is no provision, without some sort of arrangement, there is no provision for anything but a hard border. What happens then is either basically the border gets put in place, or all parties say we are willing to break our own laws and not put a border in and give it some more time. I don't know where the UK is going to fall. I don't know where the EU is going to fall. You know, it's one of these things that everyone's so wrapped up around this border. None of them want a hard border. So I don't know if they basically walk away from the talk. Someone's going to say, I insist you put security choke points there and visa things, but to not put it there puts the EU in jeopardy, that everywhere where they have borders with other countries that aren't part of the EU, like I think Denmark is not part of the EU, you know, they're saying, well, wait a minute, Ireland can travel without borders, why can't we? So it's a really tough bind, and I think it's going to end up with a hard border, but it will be interesting to see how far they implement that. Yeah, Celia is pointing out, with so many tiny roads and fields, it will never happen. This is another challenge with the border. Like Switzerland and Germany, there are official crossing points with customs and a ton of little trails everyone uses. There are literally, I've seen these pictures, there are fields with a stone wall that you can just walk across or go down a footpath in a group of woods, and these little tiny roads. This is a really good point. It's not like when you put these choke points in, yes, the big trucks and all the big movements of people in the buses, you can kind of choke point them there, but you're not going to seal the border. And this was a problem during the Troubles because you had the flow of arms and not just for casual use, but smuggling both ways and things like that becomes a real challenge. Yeah, Jen's pointing out the challenges just in Canada and the US, like if you bought groceries, that becomes a deal. Yeah, Celia's pointing out Switzerland is not EU. So Switzerland's another example of a country that if they didn't enforce hard borders on for the major trade points in Ireland, Switzerland can say, why are you enforcing it on us? These are all pressure points that are going to come to fruition here. And this is the risk for the Good Friday, is that uptick in violence we've seen over the last 6 years from 2012 is going to expand even more. Yeah, Joe, who's been in Ireland, done a lot of work there. The border's porous, but the checkpoints are guaranteed to be targets. I would not want to be a guard at one of those checkpoints. I would rather have, you know, when I was in Afghanistan, a lot of people didn't realize this. A lot of the guard posts on the base had dummies standing up in them, like little people with binoculars. You know, it wasn't, they weren't, you walk by and you look and you go, that guy hasn't moved all shift. He must be either really committed, or you look closer and it's like, oh, that's a mannequin. Great. I feel safe. I would hope these security border posts, you know, I would put a dummy there and see who attacks it. I wouldn't want to be the guy stuck in that post because, yeah, they're going to be guaranteed targets for a Molotov cocktail or something like that. Good questions. So last but not least, because we're at the top of the hour here, again, thank you for all your support. If you haven't yet, check out Patreon, www.patreon.com/infomullet. Subscribe if you can, like, share, follow. We're going to close out today's episode, and go ahead. If you have any more questions, put them in. I'll revisit. But I just wanted to a little bit for fun. It's been a heavy day with COVID outbreak in the White House, COVID outbreak worldwide, war in Armenia and Azerbaijan, potential instability in Ireland. Let's end with something fun like a good old conspiracy theory. So I got sent this the other night, and it's a 45-minute long video where I was asked, is this a conspiracy theory? And what I decided to do is share with you some of the tricks I use to not watch a 45-minute video and yet still determine if it's a conspiracy theory. So this video is actually not in the links. I didn't link it specifically because I don't like, it's this dude, and you may see this. You may see this guy popping up. It's a Crimes Against Humanity, released October 3rd. You can start talking amongst yourselves of what cues you see that this video may be a conspiracy video, because it's kind of like a murder mystery room. You can spot all the clues. But I'll just, there's some obvious clues, and I'm not even having the voice on because the guy's voice is kind of annoying, but we'll let it load up the comments because it's not, that's odd that it's not loading the comments. Comments are very important when evaluating YouTube for conspiracy. So we'll give it a chance to load up the comments. Here we go. So let me scroll through the comments. You can take a look at some of the comments. Right? Get a feel, just scan. Right? So, question, how do you know this is a conspiracy? Well, you could go Google this guy. You can Google this guy on Google. Everything that shows up is a suspect site. Like I had more red flags in a Soviet parade with Sabaton on when I Googled this guy. That's warning sign number one. That's pretty easy. He does in his opening speech, if you cared to watch it, his opening speech is all about how he's a lawyer and he's won all these lawsuits and how there's this massive world conspiracy. COVID's not a danger. He's going to sue the pants off of Germany for making this test that's led us all astray. But there's some very specific, that takes time, right? There's some very specific clues, one of which he's got, if you go to his videos, he only has like 5 videos. Every single one's about COVID. He popped up a couple months ago. So there's not like, a lot of variety, diversity, but that, that's okay. I only showed up a couple months ago on YouTube. I have a lot of videos, but you could say the same about me. But look how many views he's had for a guy who's not done much. 870,000 views, and then 39,000 of them are positive and only 738 negative. Then you look at the comments, 7,000 comments in under 3 days, and just scroll through. Don't even read it, but look at the format. Notice how they're all in paragraphs, how they're well formatted in paragraphs. Okay, you have a couple that they're using English grammar correctly. They are speaking in full sentences that are, maybe there's some ellipses and stuff, but you don't see a lot of what I would call YouTube style commentary. And none of these comments have a negative vote. Like, I say one thing wrong about Sweden. I probably have negative, because I mentioned Sweden in this video, I probably already have people crapping on my YouTube video right now. Like, YouTube doesn't work this way. If you go to a YouTube video and all you see are well-formatted, complete sentences in English with grammar and nothing but positive likes, that's a farm site. That's a bot site. They're either, someone's massively editing to make sure no negative stuff, and they've got 738 negatives just to make it look good, but none of the comments are negative. And in fact, the only time the comments argue when you dig into this would be, there's an argument of whether coronavirus is completely fictional or it was patented by Bill Gates and as this big conspiracy to get us all. That's the only arguments you find in YouTube. Go to my YouTube channel sometime. You got people throwing stools, food, using Pidgin English because they're not native speakers. I mean, they're speaking in different languages. They're not using proper grammar. It's not formatted. And so, when you see these conspiracy theories, there are some clues that this is not a legitimate site with a robust discussion on it. There's another clue here. This book, it's the only book he places in his library, and he faces it so you can see the cover. Like, if I was playing in a game, I would hover my mouse over this to see if it's shown with the quest item. And it turns out Gary Spence is a very famous litigation attorney, claims to have never lost a case, won all these major cases. He defended the Ruby Ridge shootings. He was the defense attorney for the individuals who were shot by the federal government. He never lost a civil case, never lost a criminal case. He's trained a lot of lawyers. I could find no connection between this guy and that guy. Maybe he was trained by him. Maybe he's signaling that I too am going to win this case. But it was interesting to me that he put this one book, like, really clearly showed it. And if if it was a quest item, I'm not going to follow it. I'll delete that off the quest list because I don't need those kind of quests in my life. Let's see here what the questions are. Ryan, I'd feel better in a new flannel, Tim. Yes, it's new flannel day. So if you haven't gotten your new flannel, buy it today. Sell Patreon harder. Okay, I'll sell Patreon harder. Jay Peterson, my filmmaker Fu hates the wall vent growing out of his hair. Yeah, no real person has such perfect bookshelves. Well, lawyers tend to have nice bookshelves because they never open a book after they finish law school. I mean, even look, Legal Eagle sometimes has these bookshelves behind them. They're perfect. They're always ordered, but that's lawyer books. Are they a set of encyclopedias? Yep. No one with a Waldorf and Statler as their Facebook cover should be ruining my fun mocking this man. All right, so I think we've reached the top of the hour. When it comes to Patreon, it is something that really helps us out with putting this all together. It helps us pay for the server fees. We've had to upgrade the servers. We get more hits. It pays for some of these, deeper looks when we do some of the data analytics stuff like that. We can help afford that. It also shows some of the support. We really appreciate all the help that we get. So if you haven't yet, take a look at www.patreon.com/infomullet, $5 a month for a subscriber. We're going to push all the way through 2020 election. I'm not giving up. Bring it 2020. You're throwing the kitchen sink at me. Throw it harder. I'm ready. I'm standing here. We're going to do another episode on the third Wednesday. That will also probably be a mix of COVID and presidential. We're even going to do an episode the day after the election. God knows why. I don't know why I'm signing up for that. But we're going to be here through twice a month, at least to the end of 2020. Then we may tap out and collapse. So anyways, again, appreciate all the support. If this video here is going to be put up on YouTube, then we'll split it into segments. And thanks everyone for your great comments and questions. If you have to go outside, be safe, wear a mask. Obviously, the White House should be one of the most secure. I'm not going to say it's the most secure place because they never took it seriously. But if this breakout can happen at the White House, use that as an example of what can happen at your workplace. Here's a workplace. They went to a super spreader event. They thought they were immune. 1 week later, 40 out of however many people are now positive, with who knows how many will be positive the week after. Don't do that to your workplace. Don't do that to your school. Be safe where you can. Follow safe practices. And be careful. So that's all for today. Thank you and goodbye. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.